Let's dive right in. We're starting with a profoundly bold thought that perfectly sets the stage for today. The Prism of Odysseys was built not to be understood, but to be traversed. Right away, you can see we're looking at a framework meant to be actively experienced and lived through, rather than just theoretically analyzed. The intellectual understanding is really just a secondary effect. The main goal here is a complete reconfiguration of how you actually perceive the world.
So welcome to this complete, rigorous, meticulous, and truly deep analysis of Alan Imbert's transdisciplinary framework. Today we're going to bridge the massive gap between quantum-level biophysics and deep human phenomenology. We are decoding the echoes of the Prism of Odysseys, zooming in specifically on the invisible architectures that govern our everyday interactions, our biology, and our wider society.
To navigate this highly complex and honestly fascinating journey, here is our epistemic roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the informal economy of the signal, move into the concept of the human biosourcel, explore its core spec cycle, ground these ideas in applied biophysics, and then finally zoom out to see how all of this impacts our social systems. Let's get going.
Okay, Section 1, the informal economy of the signal. We are beginning with the absolute foundation of human interaction, a concept that predates money, contracts, and modern institutions by a long shot. We're talking about the invisible architecture of reality itself. Here is a core axiom to wrap your head around. The exchange of a signal precedes market exchange. Long before formal markets ever existed, humanity operated on a completely different, totally invisible system. While we are so used to the highly visible, transactional market economy on the left, the true foundation of human interaction is the informal economy of the signal on the right. This is an entire ecosystem based on resonance, reciprocity, and symbolic debt. It's the exchange of gifts, shared stories, and transmissions between people. The traditional market economy was literally just built on top of this much older foundation. And this isn't just poetic philosophy, it's grounded in hard science. Over a century ago, anthropologist Marcel Mauss documented this foundational gift economy. Karl Polanyi later proved that our modern market economy is actually a culturally specific anomaly, definitely not some default human trait. And looking at the ecology of complex systems, scientists like Odium and Halling showed that biological networks have irreducible emergent properties and critical tipping points. This invisible economy of signals operates on those exact same irreversible biological network dynamics.
Which brings us naturally to Section 2. Let's see how this informal ecology builds into the concept of the biogissol, or human biological software.
You can essentially think of the biogissel as your internal operating system, the biological software that navigates this invisible economy of resonance we just talked about. It processes all the incoming signals. But importantly, these biogissels don't exist in a vacuum. They network together to form complex frequency ecosystems. In this space, your individual health is directly determined by the collective health of the ecosystem you're plugged into.
Now, what makes this entire architecture so incredibly compelling is the sheer structured rigor applied to the invisible. We aren't just asked to blindly believe this stuff. The framework provides a highly mapped architecture built on 5 concepts, 5 theories, and is grounded in mechanisms that have literally won 2 Nobel Prizes. It is a precise, investigative grid applied directly to the human experience.
Moving to Section 3. Every operating system has a core algorithm, right? Well, for the biogissel, that is the spec cycle. Let's break down how this software actually processes reality on a daily basis.
The spec cycle is the foundational model here. It operates in 4 sequential, mutually dependent phases: selection, projection, expectation, and finally, collection. This represents one single complete cycle of resonance. And here is the absolute key takeaway. The quality of each step strictly determines the quality of the next. You simply cannot have a high-quality integration, or collection, if your initial selection was misaligned.
Let's look a bit closer at that first crucial step. Selection is not some rational, conscious choice. It acts purely as a frequency filter, like a bandpass filter in audio engineering. A trained musician hears the underlying rhythm that an untrained ear completely misses, right? A dancer sees physical geometries in a crowded room that a regular observer just ignores. So reading what a human being consistently notices in the world is essentially reading the core code of their biosignal. It maps their current resonant geometry.
Okay, Section 4. Let's dive into the applied biophysics, because this is where the explainer gets truly fascinating. The framework takes these deep philosophical concepts and maps them directly to mathematical and physical realities.
When we map ancient traditions to modern science, the results are staggering. We aren't talking about magic here. We're talking about fluid dynamics and neuroendocrinology. Sound and music trigger an exponential clearance of the stress hormone cortisol by increasing vagal tone. Practices like Reiki and structured touch induce something called a jamming transition in the body's fascial networks. Even mudras, those specific hand gestures, actually modify interstitial fluids governed by the Navier-Stokes equations.
The crucial point here is understanding this jamming transition. By treating the body's collagen and fascia networks like a dense granular medium, physics shows us that dropping the inertial number, which essentially means achieving perfect physical immobility and specific pressure, causes an actual phase transition. The tissue literally relaxes its physical state, which instantly releases residual accumulated mechanical tension and trauma.
Furthermore, our cells are literally emitting light, ultra-weak photon emissions, or biophotons, which are tied to our mitochondrial oxidative stress. At the exact same time, water in our cells structures itself along membranes into a crystalline liquid phase called easy water. This acts as a biological capacitor, allowing for ultra-fast proton signaling. And why does this matter to you? Because these are fundamental laws of physics. Healing protocols that engage them require absolutely zero active cognitive effort from the patient. This guarantees systemic inclusivity, healing that completely bypasses social, physical, and intellectual barriers.
Let's pull back to the macro view for Section 5. How does this biological software and physical vulnerability intersect with our modern societal structures? We are moving from microbiology to macrosociology.
Suffering is rarely just an isolated, individual failure. It is almost always a mathematically predictable cascade of systemic failures. Look at the equation on the screen. Neurodivergence, combined with early trauma, a dysfunctional family, an inadequate school system, and economic precarity. This creates a highly predictable trajectory toward marginality and institutional violence. But the massive insight here is that this is a systemic fatality, not a biological one. And because it's built by systems, those systems can absolutely be transformed.
We see this structural violence so clearly in our institutions. As sociologists Bourdieu and Passeron pointed out decades ago, education often just reproduces social inequalities under the very convincing mask of meritocracy. By treating children who have vastly unequal inherited cultural capital as if they were completely equal, the system structurally favors the children of the dominant classes. The baseline frequency is rigged from the start.
Similarly, our modern digital infrastructure acts as a highly ambivalent force. On one hand, as Shoshana Zuboff notes, we have surveillance capitalism extracting our behavioral data in an asymmetric exchange which leads to profound algorithmic alienation. But on the exact same platforms, we see massive global innovation, transdisciplinary collaboration, and isolated individuals finally finding their frequency ecosystem to build true communities of practice. It's a double-edged sword.
And on a nutritional level, our biological plasticity means we're deeply vulnerable to our environment. Industrial food systems, heavily reliant on ultra-processed foods, are currently feeding our bodies while quite literally starving our brains. This massive disruption of the gut microbiome links directly to the epidemics of modern anxiety and depression. Everything is connected through this biogeospatial network.
Ultimately, this entire framework leads us to a crucial realization. We are a profound convergence of biological, psychological, and social plasticity. Yes, this extreme plasticity makes us deeply vulnerable to toxic environments. But, and this is the key, it is also our fundamental resource for change. We can be recalibrated. Which brings us right back to the purpose of the Prism of Odysseys. Once you traverse this material, once you truly internalize this framework, the actual physical world hasn't changed at all. But you now perceive an entirely new layer of signal. Your internal probe, your sonde intégrale, is recalibrated. You start receiving frequencies you were totally blind to before. I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder as you step back into the informal economy of the world. If you were to intentionally change your frequency filter, your selection step, how might recalibrating your own internal probe alter the constellations of reality you perceive every single day? Thank you for exploring this with me, and keep your eyes and your biomasol open.